do it. Good afternoon and welcome to EdSurge Live and to this continuation of our special series of online discussions about how colleges should respond to the coronavirus. I'm Jeff Young, an editor and reporter here at EdSurge. As you probably all know, we're a national publication covering the intersection of tech and education, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. And this is week 4 of this series that we've been co-hosting with the Future Trends Forum. And that has meant that I have been co-hosting these with Bryan Alexander, who runs that weekly discussion. People should definitely check out the Thursday Future Trends Forum if you don't already see that. But this week, we're changing things up a little bit. We have asked Bryan to be the guest today, and I'll be the one kind of asking him questions, so he'll be in the hot seat a little bit. And first off, I wanted to say, Bryan, before I talk a little bit more about our format, thank you for joining us again today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always a treat to get to talk with you, Jeff, and always great to connect with EdSurge, as well as everybody in the audience. Hello,
Great.
Karen. Hello, James. Hello, Kali. Hello, Lisa. All kinds of folks.
Yeah, some familiar names. And so for those of you out there who have been keeping track, or maybe you've even earned a perfect attendance badge for this series, we've been covering a range of things. I'm just going to go over them really quickly and heard a mix of perspectives over these last few weeks. First week, we talked about advice for online teaching and explored issues that colleges were facing as they were doing this unprecedented switch over from in-person teaching to online teaching en masse, as campuses had just shut down for COVID-19. The second week, we talked about more of the institutional response, and we looked at, kind of mused on what things could be moved, what parts of campus life could be moved online and what really maybe can't be, and how this is kind of a big experiment in that for college leaders and professors. And in the last week, we had students, and we heard from 3 different students from different sizes and shapes of institutions sharing their experiences and even offering their advice to professors and college folks about what they think should be done so that we can all get through this. And we have the transcripts, by the way, and recordings of all of those available. So please check those out if you haven't seen them or if you weren't in the audience. But today we're going to talk to Bryan and pick his brain a little bit with his futurist hat on. And as people know, that's why it is the Future Trends Forum. And Bryan is really sort of expert and has his monthly report on what factors are out there going that shape the future. And now I think we're going to need some ways to think about the future and with all these unprecedented things happening. Okay, so before I get really started, I have a quick ask for everyone in the audience. We want you to all help plan. We would like you to help plan the next EdSurge Live. And for that, we're gonna do it again on this topic, but we're gonna go back to our once a month format, just to let you know, and which is what we did before this pandemic. And we're gonna kind of go back to doing it solo and Bryan, so we can give Bryan more time to keep focusing on all the other great work he's doing. But we will be focusing on this topic every month on the last Tuesday of every month. And for the next topic, we'd love to help you find out what you would like to hear. So we've made up a Bitly survey that I think we'll put in the chat. It is bit.ly/ESLive survey. And it's really 2 questions, but it's essentially a 1-question survey. It's pick off this list what you would like to hear us chat about next time. So if you could do that right now, it would be a super big help, and you can influence the shape of what's to come. So while you all are doing that, I'll just quickly go over this format. We think, I personally think of this as kind of like an NPR call-in show type of thing. We go for the hour. I'll start with a few questions for our guest, and then we just kicks it off, and then we'll take questions from you all. We'll open that up pretty soon. And so we hope, even if you don't have a question, if you just want to share a comment or a perspective from your own campus, this is the way to do it. I mean, it's been wonderful over the course of the series and in EdSurge Live and Future Trends Forum. People are very, that's really the benefit of this whole thing. It's what makes it makes it work. So we will ask you to, when I do that, you can click on the raise hand icon, or in the chat, which people are already doing, type in a question. And then you might be contacted by Michael Senna, who is a colleague of mine at EdSurge, and he might help traffic cop, like who comes up when, to ask your question via video or audio. So, okay, so that's a lot of announcements. But Bryan, I was just looking before we just kind of thinking through like where we're at, and it has been almost exactly 1 month, just four weeks since the University of Washington became the first college to stop in-person classes and shift to online because of COVID-19. I mean, it was Friday, March 6th or something like that. And here we are, April 7th, and the world it's just hard. It just feels like that was a lot longer than a month to me. And your list that that list that you put together, that spreadsheet that you quickly thought to put out there, Bryan, that I know a lot of our audience knows about, where people could crowdsource the when they knew that colleges had announced they were closing or delaying or doing things because of COVID-19. That is up to 280 colleges in the US that have essentially shut down campus life, or at least in-person classes. And it's, there was a headline I saw in the New York Times the other day that said more than half, I think, of the world's population is living in lockdown, essentially, where governments have told people to stay inside as much as possible. And it is unprecedented times. I think the word unprecedented can't be said enough. But I wanted to start, Bryan, for you with something that's been kind of an elephant in the room, I know, in some online forums lately, including ours, which is what do you think some impacts might be for higher ed if campuses can't get back to opening in the fall? I think there's been a lot of, especially the early closures were like a couple weeks, maybe we'll be back. And then, more and more obviously it's an unknown situation. So I'm not asking you to tell us which day we'll all be back. But if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on what if the fall is not a back to normal kind of social time.
I've been working on a series of blog posts about this, and I think part of it depends on exactly how we get to the fall. So, for example, it's possible that we're going to be under a straight lockdown for the next year. We could just be this time next year.
Wow.
You'll be in your same chair. I'll be here. You and I will each have more gray hairs. My cats will still be here and kind of bored of it. That's Artie in the chat will be 3. It's quite possible. We have the other possibility is that we'll have waves of pandemic. So it may be that the end of May, early June, we get the all clear. We decide that, oh, great, we can go back face to face. And then August and September, we'll plan for it. I will be really excited about that. And then come October, maybe winter, we get another pandemic outbreak, either because the virus has mutated or because it has shifted through another population, or for some reason that we don't fully understand. And then we have to go back under quarantine again. So I think part of it is based on what kind of shape the pandemic has. And then how higher education responds. I mean, there are a lot of ways. I mean, so we can think about the economics, and every way I think about the economics is bad. You think that we have at least 1 quarter of recession, if not 3 or 4, in which case state governments are going to have less money because their revenue will be hit and their cost will go up, which means they'll spend less on public universities. It means that private universities, the ones that depend on endowments, their endowments are being whacked upside the head very badly right now. It means that families will probably have less money to spend on higher education, and so on and so on. So it may be that looking at the next academic year, that we'll have at least a clamp down on budgets, if not a serious crisis. And that's one detail. A second detail to think about is how students, as well as faculty and staff, feel about the physical environment of the campus. Say we have an all clear. People in the chat were talking about, summer classes being online, but maybe come fall we're good. We'll ever want to come back? I mean, think of it this way. We may have students who are terrified The exact opposite of the spring breakers who infected part of the U.S. And I think of people who just don't want to risk it. Campuses may have to compete to share how clean they are, just how many cleansings they went through, their procedures. It may be that their family doesn't want them to go. Why send a 19-year-old to campus when they could get infected, come back and infect grandmother? It may be that faculty and staff have the same anxieties. So that's something we have to think about, that the fall may be in the sense of kind of blended, and that some of the classes will be face-to-face and some of the students will be online. In addition, we have to think about a third issue, which is what students think of the experience. I mean, online learning in this lockdown, do they find it to be sufficiently inferior that they will desperately want face-to-face? Or will they find it to be adequate, if not better? In which case they might not want to come back. And I haven't seen good polling on this. I've just seen lots and lots of different anecdotes, and still early days, although it feels like an early year. But I think we need to keep that in mind, because that will reshape how things play out. It may be that we have a lot of students who decide to take a gap year in some effect. It may be that they just simply can't afford to go back to school. So that third dimension is a really, really powerful one. On top of this, we have to think about what happens to our curriculum. I mean, I mentioned the economic stress. A lot of colleges and universities are going to have to think about the programs they offer. For example, over the past decade, Jeff, you know this from my own writing, and those who are here have been reading my work know this, that we've been seeing colleges and universities cut programs that they don't see as enrolling high enough numbers of students, and then trying to divert funds to those that are more likely to enroll. So we'll, broadly speaking, cut the humanities and the arts and increase not just STEM business, but also think now pandemic-related fields, the full gamut of allied health, for example, perhaps psychology, perhaps microeconomics. How does that change up curriculum? And that's going to have an impact in the fall. I want to stop for a second. I'm going on a limb.
Yeah, no, and I really, it's one of those things that you can see the dominoes fall is like is an image that keeps coming up when I interview people of like, if this happens, if this kind of thing doesn't get to go forward, and this doesn't, and this doesn't, and this doesn't, and then the further you go out, it's just a bunch of things that are down. But I do wonder, one of the things that we had originally, that we, at the very end of the last session, I had sort of mentioned that we'd really be talking a lot today about equity. And we invited some folks, but they couldn't make it because they're doing the work that they need to be doing to get out laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots and that kind of thing. But I'm curious, first on this, and then I'll get to some of the work in the now. But overall, this vision you painted, it sounds like a tough one for kind of under-resourced students, right? If state funding is cut and families have less money, it almost sounds like, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, to me, it sounds like back to a college is a more elite thing for the elite for a while, again, more than it has been. I don't know if that's fair to say.
I mean, in a sense.
Not that I want that, I'm just sort of looking, yeah.
I wasn't concerned at all. In a sense, we've been teetering on the edge of that. Every campus I go to, I've heard faculty say, there are students here who shouldn't be here. We admit too many students. And then there's the general cultural sense that maybe college shouldn't be for everyone. You hear Mike Rowe, is it Rowe, who keeps saying, we should focus on hands-on jobs. You think about the demographics of woodworkers, plumbers, and people in HVAC who are aging and aging and aging. You think, wow, these are great opportunities entering the middle class. In the chat, Lisa Durf asks about VOTEC. It may be that becomes a huge field. In fact, if the usual historical pattern holds, community colleges should get a flood of students coming in over the summer and fall, because community college enrollment is often tracking very closely to unemployment. I'm not sure if that's going to happen this time for various reasons. But again, I think we risk the long-term effect of having that kind of 1920s model, where if you're from the elite, you go to college or university, and if you're not, you're not. And that's a risk downstream that we have to really be careful of.
Right, and I think in a way, I think all these things, and I feel like your work is always doing this. It's not to sit here and try to say, oh, everything's bad and there's nothing we can do about it. But this is a future everyone will be shaping together as people are trying to respond to this pandemic.
I'm
And
happy to
yeah.
talk about some of the silver linings. And Patricia, if the bird song is too loud, let me know. I can
Oh, I
close.
love the birds. No, I'm with the chatters who say that's a good thing. Yeah.
Really quick,
Um,
I have two cats who are out there right now, just lazily thinking of, of mass bird murder. There are a lot of silver linings, and I would love to hear what people are seeing of them. One of them right now is that we are experiencing two things simultaneously. We're having the biggest experiment in online learning in human history. And that's just fantastic to see in all kinds of ways that we are learning how this works. We're right now, we can come back to this, Jeff. I'd love to talk about this. Lisa, forgive me for repeating this, but we're seeing, I said earlier this morning, we're seeing this rush possibly away from live video conference learning and towards asynchronous because of a big, blowback against having classes via video. That's interesting, though, to think about this as an experiment. We're quickly learning about this. As Elizabeth Ebersol pointed out, educators are having to consider where they are in their learning, and they need to walk the walk of lifelong learning. I mean, profs have to learn how to turn on the right light, how to mute themselves when they're not talking, and all of that. But the flip side of this is what John Warner and others have been saying, is that maybe we should approach this as an experiment, collecting data, quantitative and qualitative data. Maybe instead we should be thinking about this as a gigantic effort to reconfigure how we care for students as well as for each other. How we should attend to where students are physically and emotionally. That this should be a kind of revolution in pedagogy where we're not just saying, look, great tool, use it. Instead, we're saying, well, where are you now? How can we best serve? What is the best moment for you? Maybe using Blackboard or maybe using Zoom or whatever is not appropriate for you because you're under lockdown and you have an ailing senior relative who you need to care for. I think that's really, really potentially a great dynamic. And personally, I think these two dynamics, the experiment and the caring, I think they can easily happen at the same time. Another silver lining, though, Jeff, is what you're doing right now, and what everybody here in this call is doing, is that we're crossing over institutional boundaries, and we're comparing notes about this. We're getting to learn. We're getting great questions, and I think that kind of collaboration and communication, that's splendid. And that's another silver lining. I would love to hear more sources of optimism. Jeff, you know me well. I can be very, very gloomy at times, but I want to make sure that we get the positive ones.
Absolutely. And I think I have one more question for now, but I think this is a good time to get other people from up on stage, as you might say, to ask a question on video. So if anyone's willing to do that or you have a question, please put it in chat or click on raise hand, and we will hopefully get that dialogue started. So in the meantime, I am curious. I know that, back to the now, as I said, on this issue of equity, what have you seen? I know you're watching very closely on Twitter and in the news and in all kinds of places. What are you seeing as some of the creative ways, or maybe just straightforward ways that are effective in how colleges are making sure that their students are connected, or have the tech they need and the bandwidth that they need to get to their classes?
Well, in terms of bandwidth, the only thing that I've heard is shipping people Wi-Fi hotspot gear.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know to what extent that actually works. I mean, if you don't have access to signal, you can't make much of it. But that's one thing. In terms of the hardware rather than the bandwidth, I've heard of many cases of campuses, especially libraries as well as learning centers, loaning out laptops, tablets, and other hardware necessary because not everybody has access to these. And so I think that's very positive. I've also been hearing about campuses trying to do student life apart from classes online. And I think that's an American higher education specialty where we have that kind of focus on residential life. So everything from supporting esports to, doing fun dormitory style games online. In fact, I just saw a video clip of the actor Matthew McConaughey doing a bingo online for Zoom for a bunch of seniors. I haven't seen anything of that caliber for student life, but we can do all this kind of thing ourselves. I have heard that there are experiments in using VR, and I'd like to see more of that and to hear more of that. The chat box is just going like a firestorm.
Yeah, actually, I think we have, I think Callie Morrison, who is a columnist for EdSurge these days, we really have been excited to have her voice in our, I was going to say our pages, but you know what a page is, web pages. We don't have print. But I would love we'll click the right buttons to get that to happen. And it'll be good to see Callie.
While we're bringing her up, I can quickly answer a question that came up from Lisa Durf. Lisa asked about using virtual worlds. I haven't seen much of it, except last week I did some virtual world work with my students. I'm teaching in Georgetown's Learning Design and Technology graduate program, and I have my students use the Mozilla Hub virtual world. We were exploring virtual reality, and I wanted to have them do that to get a sense of social VR. And that was very, very interesting. Jonathan mentions Minecraft. There's a project called Quarantine, T-E-N, University that's going to have a Minecraft mass graduation this May, I think May 22nd or so.
I was just about to put that in the chat. I saw an article about that. It was kind of started tongue-in-cheek by two Boston University or Boston College, I forget, students. And it seems like they're going to actually do it, though, because enough people have actually clicked that they want this. Callie, welcome. It's great to see you. Do you have a question for
Good to see you
Bryan?
as well. Yeah, Bryan. So good to see you. On a call earlier today, and a colleague from California brought up a really good point that I hadn't thought of yet in this whole COVID pandemic situation we're in. Do you remember HighFlex? So this is proposed in 2010. And at the time we were all kind of like, how is that going to happen? But it was one where the proposed model was that students pick on their own whether they attend virtually or face-to-face, kind of on the fly. And I just hadn't thought about that. I don't know if you had, or if it, you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I remember the 7 things you should know about it. I'm on the 7 Things advisory board, and I remember looking at that and thinking, this is really nifty. And I think the term is great because the term, especially the spelling, gives me 1970s flashbacks. And it also echoes what, if you will, on a tactical level, it echoes what Stanford and what Georgia Tech and others have been saying at strategic level, being able to have students change modalities during the course of their learning, what Stanford calls learning episodes. And I think this is great. I'm really glad that you dug this back up. It may be that we can do this. The problem is being able to do that institutionally and doing it on the fly. That is, will instructors be comfortable with that kind of swapping back and forth? And will institutions be able to operationalize it? I mean, Elizabeth mentions in the chat box that her doctoral program had a choice of that. In terms, Elizabeth, if you could just say a bit more, if was it on a semester by semester basis, a year by year basis? But I think that would be fun to see. Good call.
Well, I have to give the shout out to Kate Miffin. She is the one who brought that back to light. And I just
well done, Kate.
Read over it again. I was like, that really could be the answer. If we can set up our structures so that when you get sick, you don't have to come to class. You can participate online. Or when you're well and you want to be there with the other classmates, you can. I mean, or vice versa. If you need to self-quarantine for whatever reason because you're immunocompromised, but you still want to be in the class,
well,
then we could investigate.
Well, the classes that I've been teaching at Georgetown over the past year, we've been doing a version of this. We haven't used the term. That is, we have a group of students face-to-face meeting in Georgetown in a terrific classroom. But then we have one or more who are meeting online. Occasionally that's because the students are housed elsewhere. So right now, one of my students is based in Arizona, and we like to make cheesy jokes about tumbleweeds. But we've had other students who were in East Asia, or who were actually in the DC area, but we had a weather event at one point and people basically couldn't get to campus, or they were very sick, but they wanted to come in. They were contagious, for example. So I think we should, we should see more of that. Thank you again for raising it, Kelly.
That's a really interesting idea. It's some of these things where that wasn't probably why I was invented, this approach, but that would be the tool that would really help a little bit if this is a longer term disruption. Thanks for the question.
One more silver lining that you can see with Kelly's image is, in American media, we have this tension between we like professional media content, and we also like amateur that we find authentic. So we want Spielberg, but we also want to have reality TV. We love well-produced NPR podcasts, but we also like podcasts from someone running down the road as they describe something. And one of the things I love about the video experience that we're all getting in higher education now is we're getting these glimpses into people's lives. And I think we're really going for that authentic amateur sense, and then people go to a lot of trouble to make sure their backgrounds look good. And it's great to look into them. But then we also get, and as I say this, one of my cats comes in. All right, you. We get children or animals that come in and attack. And it's great to peer into people's lives. I was thinking that, Kelly, because I'm looking at your room, and that's a fantastic red wall. It's just great, and it just really shaped well. And, of course, there's Jeff, who's blowing my entire theory, right? With his very.
I know. I feel like I should take this down right away. It's just my home office is not as well painted, so can't compete.
And I have too many books in my background, But
yeah, I'm very spoiled. I have an office off of the house. I thought you were referring to my dog who's snoring behind me.
Awesome.
And 40-pound St. Bernard sawing logs.
Well, we'll move the camera so we can see the puppy. I mean, that's the priority right there.
Oh, there we go. Oh boy.
Hello.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have to get a screen grab from the video and put that back out. Well, honestly, thanks again for sharing that. And I think we have got some other questioners teeing up here, but Bryan, I had a question I wanted to ask you as well while we're waiting. Is basically, I saw a post on your site about kind of misinformation and kind of scammy things out there related to COVID-19. Obviously, this is something a lot of people are tracking as obviously a role for college, even before this pandemic, has been trying to help educate people and make people digital citizens and aware of just kind of sorting through information, having that literacy, which is harder than ever with the online environment that everyone was swimming in. And I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are about what college's role are in this moment in the kind of spread of misinformation that's going on in a rampant pace in some cases around the virus itself in some ways too.
Well, that's a good point. And just if you haven't seen this, friends, just to back up, as a futurist, I try to look for signals of the future in the present. And sometimes they're major trends, and sometimes they're faint signals. And so I have to look through the entire depth of a society. I usually look for the most powerful forces, but I also look at the fringes. And I shared some stories about wacky stuff, disinformation, one especially, I think, potentially scary scam. And some of these are just going to be epiphenomenal and will disappear. Some of them are humorous, and some of them are disturbing. I think the role of higher education in addressing this, well, I mean, one is the whole idea of digital literacy, which builds the library background of information literacy, that we're really interested in teaching students how to assess information, how to make use of information, using critical thinking along with technical skills and all of that. And that's something that's very powerful. And by the way, here, shout out to Michael Caulfield, who does fantastic work in this field. And I think that's been, the American Library Association identified this as an issue back in the 1980s. And librarians have been on it 24/7 ever since. I do think we have some other roles as well. And these are a little more controversial. One is the idea that faculty can be public intellectuals, and they can wade into public debates to try to take issue with false information or disinformation, and they can do this publicly. And I think this is controversial simply because we haven't really embraced public intellectuals in higher education. But I think that would be one really, really powerful thing. And I think another is we might be able to advise people. We might serve as a place for people to come to if they want to find out what's going on. I just had a quick question came in on the chat about this, about Pennsylvania sharing points that it is Quaker state and Amish state, which is quite true. Those are all, Pennsylvania is a large and vast state with quite a few wonderful, wonderful subcultures. I know the Amish country pretty well. Thank you for sharing that. That wasn't a question, that was just a good comment. And Jeff, thanks for sharing Mike Caulfield's most recent one there.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one, and one that, like I said, I mean, this is none of these issues are new, but they're just heightened or made more complicated by the fact that people aren't in the room together, and it's often even hard to know which things are spreading invisibly to me, maybe because of my filter bubble online, versus people that that have different feeds that I don't know even what's in them.
Well, the filter bubble is a good point, and it's always good to try to pop that bubble and get away from it as much as possible. But you mentioned this is complex. I think there's two reasons, and one comes out of the chat box. Matthew Cullen mentions that there are thoughts of companies, ed tech and otherwise, that may be seen as profiting off of the pandemic. And I've heard I've seen over the past month a great deal of communications from educational technology companies, as well as many others, airlines and so on, sending me, very plangent notes, telling me that they hope I'm okay and they hope they can serve us and all of that. Then I've seen the pushback to that, which is that this is vampiric or vulture-like, that people are trying to do marketing on the back of people suffering. And so I think both of those things are true at once, that we are seeing that, and they can be that form of marketing. And it's tricky. I mean, what do you do when you're a company that has something that you think can help? A company like Zoom, right? And you email people and say, hey, our technology should be able to help. There's an ethics here, which is pretty squishy, which the US hasn't really experienced since 1918. How can what's the right thing to do in this sense, especially as the economy is collapsing into a recession or worse all around us? And that's a really, really good point to mention. Thank you.
Well, I had a question from an audience member who wasn't, that I'll just read the text of, from Jake Hansen. I wonder what innovative solutions will universities leverage to keep students connected to the extended university community while they remain at a distance? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I assume I'm going to assume that you mean by the same university where they're enrolled. So
I think so.
Let me know. Like, for example, if you're in the system, that kind of thing. I think one is looking at the largely undiscussed but very powerful role of libraries and academic libraries. I mean, a lot of campuses, libraries can be incredible anchors for the community in all kinds of ways, which I'm happy to talk about. But in this online world, I think libraries and librarians offer all kinds of powerful roles in terms of, just this morning, I just got a PDF from Interlibrary Loan that I put in for the day before. So Interlibrary Loan, which is awesome, fantastic library superpower, is still there and working. 2 days ago, chatting with a librarian on library chat, answering a question. I mean, so that's all one connection that can be played. A second, I think, is a lot of student life organizations can do more. Everything from simply, having RAs email everybody on their list in their hall, telling them, hi, thinking of you, hope you're all well, to different other functions on campus, be they fraternities and sororities, to professional organizations, pre-professional organizations. I think there's a lot that can be done with that, and that would really help kind of give a thicker sense of what's going on in campus. It may be that communications from campus leaders, such as presidents or provosts, may help as well. And it depends on the type of institution. If it's a religious campus, for example, to have religious sentiments. If it's a military school, to have this kind of thing. And on top of this, I think campuses that have a kind of public life, it would be great to maintain that, to have, say, a Zoom session or any other video conference session based on what would have happened on campus. If you're going to have a panel talking about fake news, for example, well, if you normally have that on campus, we'll have it online for this and keep that all going. I mean, we're really trying to kind of reproduce the full campus experience online as best we can. That's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have been struck. I have been struck in covering this, how much when I've talked to students and others, the classroom experience is just one tiny sliver of what people actually are excited about or what they've come for the undergraduate, especially. And so, that, and in some weird ways, it's almost the easiest to replicate online. And then all these other things are really hard because they've been even more socially peer to peer. And we have Elizabeth, I believe, who is going to come up and ask a question, and we'll hopefully get that. There it is. It might default to muting, so if you could unmute, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here. And what's your question? There you go.
Yep, here I am. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I've been on before. It's okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. My question had to do with colleges and universities, and it was driven by my thoughts about Pennsylvania and what's going on there, right? And it being different, or, so then state by state, and colleges and universities operate differently. And we're seeing so many things already in every aspect of life about the fractious nature of our country on a state by state basis. And so then how does this play out in higher ed? And it gets me wondering about places that maybe have less state by state variance, right? Countries that maybe have a more centralized approach to higher education, or I guess requirements or standards. And I'm wondering if anybody knows anything about that, about how other countries are faring in terms of higher education, whether a centralized approach is better or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the US is kind of unusual in the world in that we have a very disorganized higher education system at the national level. We've never had a national university. We don't have a national university system. Our Department of Education is about as old as I am, and it has almost no role in higher education, and that's really unusual. A lot of nations have a national campus and they have a national system, and even there's some interesting hybrids like. In Britain, where you have JESC, which is this weird kind of like powerful, authoritative edu-cause on steroids for the nation.
It can give out money, right? The JISC model is like, yeah,
right. Less than they used to, quite sure. They have a huge staff, hundreds of people. But right now, I've been hearing different stories from different nations. In the chat, Aradi Nagaraj mentions that some are in chaos because of the importance of exams, competitive exams for entry or exit. And we've heard that definitely in China. I wouldn't say chaos in China just because China is so regimented, so organized, but they've definitely delayed people's careers by a year because of that.
Yeah, because they delayed the main test in China, the Gaokao, I believe it's called, right? They delayed that, so I don't even know when it's rescheduled. But
that's an old exam too. That predates the People's Republic, and that's a huge change. Plus, they've delayed all the exams for getting into the U.S. That's a big issue. I don't want to get political here, so I'll try to weigh my words very carefully. I think the relative lack of national coherence of a plan for the United States is making things difficult, but I think a lot of states are used to thinking of themselves in higher education as the higher education authority. And then it really goes from state to state. If I can go back in time and rewind to say January, quite a few states, including Pennsylvania, were having difficulties trying to balance enrollment and finances for their higher education systems. especially in the Northeast and the Midwest. And I think right now the COVID crisis will just put that on fast forward. I would love to hear more from other people in other nations like Arati. We've heard from, at the beginning of our talk, there were people from Britain as well as from Canada. I would love to hear if they have anything that they can share about the experiences in those nations.
Thanks so much for the question. Yeah, I think that is interesting. I mean, so since this is a worldwide experience out there, there's definitely going to be this whatever forced experiment, unwanted experiment is going to give us some interesting data that no one ever wanted. Yeah, we have another questioner, I believe, who's ready to come up, Corey. And great, Corey, welcome. And if you can unmute, and we'd love to hear your question.
Hi, Corey.
Hi, Bryan. Thank you for all you've been doing through this crisis. Really appreciate you being, first mover and starting a lot of these forums and spawning some really great discussion all over social media and with these video chats. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. All kudos to Ed Surge and to Jeff for doing all this work here for these forums. This is a week after week I've been setting this up, and that's a lot of work, and thank you. And I have to ask, Corey, are you wearing a red shirt to keep the red theme going?
Yes, I'm doing my part, and my background is London, which is the last physical place I was allowed to travel.
Well, it's a nice memory to have. And where are you based right now?
I am sheltering in Boston.
Oh, okay.
Or did you have a question?
I do have a question. Bryan, I was wondering if you might think that some interesting partnerships between education providers might develop, partly because the friction in partnering is lower when you've got virtual instruction modes. Also, it may be that certain providers have more experience or platforms or capabilities in virtual instruction that other providers might look to as supplementing what they have. So just wondered what you might imagine for partnerships, or maybe you've already been seeing this happening.
This is a fantastic time for partnerships. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say you go back to London, and that's a good thing. And you're going to attend a conference. Well, we don't have, we can't do a physical conference anymore. Well, surely someone's got to have an academic conference in a box offering that an institution could just contract with and set that up, right? I mean, and that would be a partnership, say, between, pick a few different offerings and to be able to set that up. Similarly, we're talking about virtual reality and virtual worlds for education. I mean, it'd be wonderful to have, just hypothetically, just to put this together, to say Mozilla and Blackboard get together to form a way of plugging hubs into Blackboard's LMS or something like that. I mean, this would be a great way for academia to partner as well. Since I'm just being hypothetical, let's just take my Blackboard hubs thing. Let's plug this into the SUNY system in New York State so that those 60-odd colleges and universities can then interact with that really, really smoothly and easily. Or in your state to do that with the UMass system. You got, what, 4 campuses for that?
At least, I think more.
Okay. So I think there's a lot of great potentials for that. Now the problems are pretty extensive. I mean, one problem is that is the economy that I mentioned before. So that's both going to make it's going to reduce the amount of money in play, and it's also going to increase competition. So that can be a downside. And the second problem is the regulatory framework is going to be kind of chaotic because a lot of this is happening in a hurry. Van just pointed out. Recent Department of Education guidance, there's a lot of changes in that level, and a lot of campus lawyers are going to be nervous about doing these things. But I think on top of this, if I could add another positive, we mentioned the Minecraft graduation, which was started by 2 students, Brigham Young, I think, or Boston University.
I think it was Boston.
I think it was Boston.
That Boston influence, Corey.
Yeah.
but to think about student projects that can really take off here. Two of my former students met with me yesterday morning because they've got a fantastic idea and I really wish them well. So it could be students really see problems and challenges, they want to run with it, and they can partner up with other groups too. What a great, great idea, Corey. Thank you.
Crowdsource learning.
That too.
Grassroots crowdsource learning.
My favorite
What
story.
would that look like?
My favorite story about this was in Italy. You know, one of the interesting side effects of lockdowns is that pollution drops. So we know that comparing March 2019 and March 2020, looking at New York or looking at Beijing, you could say emissions have dropped. So this is the best thing we've done for climate change. But in Italy, light pollution has dropped. So a bunch of astronomers were crowdsourcing public astronomy, asking people, well, you're at home, go out into your balcony, take a look at the sky, and then putting all that data together. So, I mean,
It's amazing.
that's another silver.
Oh, I hadn't seen that one. Thanks so much, Corey.
Yes, thank you so much for all you're doing.
Great. Appreciate all of you here. And there was a question in the chat, Bryan, that really went to a point you made earlier, which was, I think, from an undergrad at UCLA who said that they have found that taking online courses is overall a better learning experience than attending in-person lectures. So that, I mean, you sort of said maybe that'll be the experience for some people, and what will that mean? It will be interesting to see if that is a widespread view later on. I don't know.
Something that, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I would love to hear more about that if you can. I missed that comment, but if you want to say more,
I gotta credit Michael for calling that one to my attention on our back channel here. But so we would love to hear from Taylor if that person wants to come up. But yeah, I think there's so much that you mentioned, not just the silver linings, but these ideas of different ways to configure things to, and there are, like, it seems like there are some groups coming together or boundary crossings. And so it'll be interesting to see if there is more of that. One of the stories there's Taylor, hold on. I will turn it over. So if you don't mind unmuting, Taylor, would you share more of your experience as a student?
Sure. So I think I found online learning so far to be more effective because the lectures are pre-recorded, and so it's much more time efficient. And when I'm listening to a lecture, I can always go back and listen to what was said or fast forward. And I can't really do that when I'm in person and the professor says something and I miss it. So.
So you are, and so if you don't mind me asking, just on it, because so many different colleges or individual professors are doing it differently. So you're in classes, it sounds like, that you're getting a lecture video and then having, I guess, some work that you're proving that you've watched it or something like that. Is that about right?
Yeah.
And is the professor recording that lecture? Sorry, Bryan, I'm just like, I can't help myself to, I'm so curious about Taylor's experience. So is that professor like recording it in their own home or and sending those? So it's kind of like
pre-recording it and they're posting it.
Nice. That's really interesting. Okay, I will stop talking so Bryan can get a word in. Thank you.
Well, no, I think that's a great example. Tell me, can you give me a bit more information? I mean, so like which classes, for example, and which university or college?
Well, I go to UCLA, and I'm taking like communications class, neuroscience and economics, and so all the lectures are pre-recorded.
So that's fantastic. I mean, this is one of the great advantages. But are they video or audio recordings?
For one class, it's audio, and then for another, it's video. So.
That's very interesting. I'm just curious yourself personally, which do you prefer, audio or video?
I think the video is better because there's also the slides. So you can see the professor and then you can also see the slides at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's really, really helpful. So it's interesting to think about this. Taylor, have you been talking about the terms synchronous or asynchronous at all?
No.
So in education technology, we refer to anything that happens live, like we're doing right now, as synchronous. And anything that gets displaced over time as asynchronous. So, you know, you're asking questions and we're asking you questions, and this is synchronous, but what you're describing is these audio and video recordings are asynchronous. You get to listen to them when you want to. So maybe when, you know, when you're, you know, in the kitchen and you're working on food and you hit play so you can see this and listen to this, and then you can pause it, rewind it. I mean, it's interesting to see that the asynchronous really works for you. That's a good point.
And it reminds me, I'm hearing a lot of, there's another, you know, jargony word that is in the education space of the flipped classroom. And it's this approach where you have the students watch or listen to a recording of a lecture, and then use other parts of people's time together back when we were in person classrooms to, like, you know, do activities or really do group projects or that kind of thing. So it seems I'm hearing some basically people saying that's what they like it when professors are trying to use that approach in this online time. So sounds like Taylor's in that camp. Taylor, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead if Bryan has another question.
Quick question. I mean, you mentioned communications and neuropsych. What are you majoring in?
Communications.
Excellent. What a great time for you.
Yeah.
That will be a job that'll stay around, so most likely. So, well.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks.
Great.
We have more questions piling in, but Jeff, I just want to make sure we're, I think, 8 minutes left on the clock, and I don't want to blow out.
I do have a question for you, because that before we sort of wrap up, and this has been great to get all this feedback from the audience as usual. So thanks everybody. Bryan, you, as has been noted by previous questioners, you have been everywhere these last few weeks in very many online forums. And I mean this as a compliment. I mean, you've been working very hard to have these kinds of dialogues, which, you know, you've been facilitating for years on, you know, in better times or in easier times. So I'm curious, what is it that you might have learned from, you know, working with all these different, you're talking to so many different groups online, not just your usual crowd that you've sort of talked to, your community. And is there something that is there any kind of reflection you have, either through the content of what you've been by crossing over so many different areas, or just something that struck you about doing all these events virtually?
A few things. That's a great question. And I'm trying to write up some blog posts about this, actually. And I have an ebook about webinars that I'm trying to finish. It has
wow, that's timely.
I'm trying to get to. I think one thing is what I mentioned before about that kind of amateur versus professional nature in video. Another, I think, is our comfort in it. That we've rapidly become accustomed to this, and I don't know if it's because we are so used to all kinds of video feeds in our lives, everything from the golden age of TV to improved video technology. But I think there's a real comfort to it, which I really like. But there's a problem, maybe not a problem so much as a dynamic. I'm a longtime critic of American TV news. I think it's horrendously bad, but we learn a lot from it. And so I've noticed that what we're doing here of actually listening to people and having, you know, Taylor up here and Corey and everybody else is kind of the opposite of what I see from other video events, where they prefer to have presentation and that's the end, or they'll have a presentation and they'll have a very narrow stream, a kind of dribble of questions, and they don't allow the participants to talk with each other. I mean, I know which one I think is best, but they're both in play, and they really lead to a very different experience. I mean, Jeff, if I was going to have you and 3 other journalists and put you in a virtual box like this and have you talk about online journalism in the age of COVID-19, that would be fantastic. I would just love to hear that and to hear your thoughts. But I also like to have the actual engagement with the audience, or the population formerly known as the audience. So I think that dynamic is in play. Good question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, and I look forward to all those blog posts and in ebooks. I'm not surprised that. So I'm glad we got a preview. I feel like we got a little bit of a preview of some of your upcoming work today. I want to remind people we are getting close to time, and I don't want to. Sometimes I like to get so many questions that we don't have any time, and we just kind of it's too abrupt. But I definitely want to remind people that if they could please fill out this Bitly survey. I think the link just went by again. If I can flip to my notes, it is bit.ly/ES live survey. And if you haven't done it already, only do it once, vote once only. But please do share your thoughts on what we should do next, because we do want to involve the audience in these, and it will give us story ideas too for us to go report, frankly. And we, are, like I said before at the top of the show, we're going to switch back to our monthly rhythm. And I will, if we need to turn it back to weekly again, we can do that. But there's always it's always tough. We had a tough decision on whether to, how often to do these. But Bryan, you'll be still doing yours every Thursday, I take it, right? Future Trends Forum moves on. And I know there are also a lot of other events out there, but we really appreciate everybody taking their time to be here today and to be so, in the chat and be so active and to be bring your questions. Bryan, do you have any closing thoughts of, beyond what, sort of back to the opening of this, of where things go next? Maybe not fall. Let's talk about more, what we have looking forward to the next couple of weeks, or that they're in store for. Do you have any thoughts on either advice for the folks out here, or just thoughts on like what's next for us here?
Well, first of all, if I just put out a plea for help for everybody, in May and June, I'm teaching a graduate seminar on gaming and education. And it's computer gaming and tabletop gaming alike. And I just, if you have any ideas that would help me do this entirely online, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm looking at a whole range of technologies, because these are often very social, very face-to-face. So that's one plea for help. To re-echo something that came up earlier, I think having these kind of conversations is fantastic. And if you think about this, Jane, it's a small class, it's a seminar, so max of 16 or 20. I think these conversations are the kind that we're going to look back on historically. This is the record of how we went through this experience. My son is a history major, and he's doing research on D-Day. And last night he was going through newspapers from 1944, from June, and he was just getting that wonderful historical buzz of reading these accounts of people saying, well, here's what Normandy is like, and here is what what we see and what we don't know, and here's what we think is happening. And that's what we're doing now. We're writing those accounts, and I think we have to keep doing it. What I love is that we're writing them together. Matt Cohen says that I've become a fashion trendsetter with my beard. In fact, people have said that I should turn this upside down and use this as a face mask, which could be, it could be. But I would love to see more quarantine beards.
The only problem with that is that I'm thinking about shaving mine, but to wear masks, you apparently need to have a.
Oh, that's only for medical professionals. That's only for medical.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
And by the way, thank you for the Roll20. I really appreciate that. And Elizabeth, definitely, I want to have the students make as much of the class as possible. And Vlad, nice words. Thanks for saying that. But join us on Thursdays, but also use social media. Start up your own podcast. Post away, blog away, tweet away. We'd love to hear from you, Vlad. I would love to say more. I'd love to hear more, but I'm afraid we're at the top of the hour now.
Yeah, and we will keep it to this. We will be posting, as usual, an article and video and audio version of this, so you can listen to it however you like if you came in late. Thanks again, Bryan, and we will continue to watch your work. Appreciate this whole series has been a wonderful learning lesson for me, and a really it's been a joy. So thank you for doing it.
Terrific. You've been a great interlocutor, a great organizer, and just a fabulous host. Thank you for that. And thanks to Ed Surgeonisti for hosting. And thank you to all these participants who've been just sharing so many great ideas and comments. Thank you so much. Sleep well. Take care.
We'll be back the last Tuesday of the month, and we'll be in touch in other channels. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.